Thank you again for letting me be part of a really, I was going to say a really important, it's not a really important, it's the important conversation. What does it mean to be human? Because that's the only thing you're ever going to be. So it might be worth getting in on that conversation before you discover actually at the beginning and end of all new creations, restoration, that you're just not an immortal soul. You are actually a human being. For the first time, a human being who is female or male and not screwed up, who gets to be in relationship with other males and females in ways that are healthy and holy and gorgeous and embodied and fabulous and not scary and not abusive and not unequal. It's going to be really fun. And in the meantime, we are these human beings who have been called to our final humanity already. So this afternoon, we were talking a bit about the fact that the words image and likeness in the Old Testament are really concrete terms. They have nothing to do with your rational soul or consciousness. These were the words that were found sculpted at the bottom of statues of kings, of gods and goddesses. So when somebody who's a Hebrew from a little small tribe, in the midst of all these superpowers of the world, especially Egypt, where Pharaoh is the only embodiment of any god in their large pantheon of gods, and you start to tell a creation narrative having watched that superpower be utterly destroyed, the superpower of the planet at the time, be undone in every way by a God that they did not know, including the ones who wore his name, did not know him. They knew their story, but they had forgotten their place in the story. They had lost the plot line. They had lost any sense of their identity and purpose and calling, so they did not know how to rethink their humanity. It took God coming to Moses and going, I'd like to reintroduce myself, thanks very much, and now I'd like you to go to that one who stands up as a human being and believes that he is the incarnation of the divine upon the earth. And you, Moses, are going to be like God to him. You, who have encountered the presence of the living God, are going to go and manifest the power and presence of the living God upon the earth. You're going to take this staff and you're going to enact these acts that undo light and dark, water and land, all the things that are representative of gods in this world. We are going to recast the story of how they understand the world to function and their relationship to the divine and the creaturely. And we're going to turn it on its head and give it back so that if you will enact this divine drama, everybody will get in on this story. Everybody gets their life back through this covenant. I promised that to Abraham, Genesis 12, 400 some years ago, when you guys, before you lost the plot line. But if you will be this people, it will be for the blessing and the restoration of all the nations. And when we finish this afternoon, we come down watching the language of image and likeness actually being the language for idol. And so the Old Testament is telling you all the time that you are God's idols. That's why you're not allowed to make any, because he already made you. And it's why the Old Testament is constantly having a discourse with God's people, and he's not coming in and just being pissed off at them all the time and bashing them around and trying to figure out, get somebody to sort it out so they can obey the Ten Commandments. It's to go, I want human beings to know who they are. And the only thing that they are is the ones who bear the belovedness and the joy and the fellowship and the meaning and purpose and dominion of my life and love for the created order. As my children, they're to look like me upon the earth. And everybody else has got an idol to look at. And somebody needs somewhere to see Yahweh. So he's not the invisible Yahweh, and you're not allowed to say his name, and you're not allowed to have an image because he just loves being transcendently impossible to reach. He's saying it's exactly the opposite. I've been waiting for this gorgeous image-bearing daughter of the Most High because we, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, thought her up before the creation of the world. And we weren't finished till we had her. Do we need her? Nope. Did we make her because we were lonely? Nope. We are the Father, Son, and Spirit who happen to love each other perfectly in gorgeous union and didn't need a darn thing. But out of the overflow of our love, how much more joy would there be to share what is our life by giving life? And then inviting presence, our presence, to be present to life by those who bear our presence and power. So that when the world goes, well, what does Yahweh look like? You go, me. You think I'm making that up? Isn't it creepy and scary? And you're always like, I never really get why in the New Testament, John, like twice in a little tiny epistle would be like, in this world, you will be like Jesus. Nobody preaches those texts. In this world, we are like him, he says. How do we know that God's love is in us and made complete? Because in this world, we're like him. Why? Because he finally becomes, out of the many, many broken image-bearing children whom God just continues to be covenantally faithful to, he's like, I want to give them their humanity back. And ultimately, their humanity is to be spirit-breathed, spirit-filled, God-empowered, doing the cool stuff that is God's stuff upon the earth. I.e., what did Jesus do that somebody didn't do in the Old Testament? Except forgive sin. So don't you be assigning him divine powers when you see almost everything he did on the anointed ones in the Old Testament. The image bearers, the idols, the prophets, the kings, women and men, the judges, the random, this man of God, this person of God, Deborah. Jesus is given this language of tselem and demut, idol. Only it doesn't read like idol to us. Why? Because by the time he comes along, and in his cultural milieu in Palestine, Alexander has taken over the known world, and for a couple hundred years now, people are using Greek as their primary language. And when the Hebrew scripture gets translated, it doesn't say tselem and demut, which is the language you find on idols anymore. It says icon. And in the New Testament, if you open it up, it's like, he is the icon of the invisible God and the firstborn from among the dead. He is the beginning and the firstborn of a new creation. He is everything that is God's pre-existent presence, and he's everything that humanity was ever intended to be. And he's a new Adam who has leashed and just unleashed, I should say, a new race of human beings who will remain this way forever. And we call it the resurrection. And we're busy talking about resurrection like it's some soul floating up to some place called heaven. That's crazy making. Because you can't find anybody in the New Testament. Nobody knew, by the way, that they were writing the New Testament. They just have the scriptures. And you know what their scriptures were? The Old Testament. You know where Jesus is going, you know what? This is who I am. And you know how the prophets and the law and the Psalms and everything like told a story? You know what he's doing? He's unpacking the First Testament. So you might want to really get familiar with your family storyline. Because if you think the story starts in the New Testament, you don't have a story. You need to watch what happens when God goes, humanity is my priestly image-bearing family. And then they break. So I'm going to call a people out of a people to be a people for my name and presence so that the world can see what I look like when I'm present. And then they break. And I'm going to call them out of their broken place, and I will make them a priesthood, a kingdom of priests, and I will give within them a tribe of priests to enact the priestliness of this people upon the earth and remind them of the plot line that they're in, that they're not God, but they get to image God. So they get Sabbath right in the middle to figure out, oh, that's right, we're supposed to keep remembering who we are in this story. This is who we aren't, but this is whose image we bear, and this is what it looks like. Is I don't need to steal, because actually the one whose character I bear says, there's plenty. Trust me. There's plenty. There's this thing called manna. I give enough. And because you are still broken, I'm only going to give you enough. Because if I gave you a little more than enough, some of you would be going, you know what? That person's mom is getting really old, and I'm noticing that they're having a really hard time getting out there and getting manna. I bet if I stored some up, I could make a little profit tomorrow. You know, it's a little early for me. I'm not an early riser. If I think I'll just gather a whole bunch for the week, I'm good to go. He knows their brokenness. And within that priesthood, there's a high priest who gets to come into that space in the presence of the living God with a rope around his ankle just in case he hasn't done that which God says, okay, I'm going to ask you to do these things, and these things just remind you and the people that you are still a broken people who I'm going to cover now with my holiness because you're not yet renewed. But if you pretend and blow this off, it's going to destroy you. So tie the rope around your ankles so they can pull you out, because you'll be flat on your face dead. Because nobody else is going to come in here and get you. So maybe next year's high priest comes in and gets your bones. But just to keep things clean, why don't you tie a rope around your ankle so they can yank you out? When the Spirit of God lifts off the temple in Ezekiel 10, you watch this picture of Ezekiel, and he's in the throes of an image-bearing people who have lost the plot completely. And he says, you were a queen. I washed you. I picked you up off the roads. What is this a picture of? This is a picture of a culture where women have no value whatsoever. This is a tossed-away girl child. I saw you in your blood, and your cord wasn't even cut. And I brought you home, and I washed you, and I bathed you, and I tied you, and I said, live. And then when you were beautiful and ready for love, I married you. And then I dressed you, and I adorned you, and I gave you everything, and I shared my very splendor with you. My glory rested on you. And it says, and your beauty was perfect because I had shared my glory with you, says the living God. And then you lifted your skirts to everybody else who came by. And you gave it away for free. And Ezekiel's next picture is watching the Spirit lift off the Ark of the Covenant and going to a threshold of a door. And he says, am I going, am I staying? Am I going, am I staying? Will you be a people for God's sake? Will you be who you are, who you were meant to be? Because part of the challenge of the horrendous Ezekiel 16 call is you're not only prostituted your life, you gave away our children. You sacrificed our children. I.e., you are hanging around people who worship Molech where a child sacrifice is happening. And you are image bearers of the God of life upon the earth. And you're killing off your babies sacrificially. Am I going? Am I staying? And he says he watches the presence hover over the threshold. And then it just moves out of the picture. And for 400 years, they wait. And they restore that temple. And it says it's more beautiful in its construction. Certainly with Herod, it's far more beautiful, its construction. But the prophets go, there is none of the former glory, none, zip, zilch. Because at least with the tabernacle, the presence of God fell, and nobody could move because God was so powerfully sitting among us. The priests couldn't even get up to do their function. And when the temple was dedicated, the same thing happened again. And when it looks like maybe God's not going with them, Moses is like, oh, no. I know we're crazy, and I know down there they're like worshiping the Baals, and I'm up here getting the Ten Commandments, and I know it's bad, but please do not send an angel with us. You promised that your presence would go with us. And if your presence is not with us, do not send us up from here, because what else will separate us from all the other people in the face of the earth except your presence? That is the description of a human being. God says, thank you. I know you by name, and I love you, and I'm going to show you my glory, and I'm not going anywhere. Till Ezekiel's vision. And so they wait for an image bearer. The promise, the eschatological promise, is that the Spirit would come back. And there needs to be somebody on whom the Spirit's going to rest to get this sorted out. And you know what? They don't think he's going to be the Son of God, coming from God, as God. They think God's going to give them a person, one like the Son of Man. And he's going to be an anointed one, like their scriptures say. And they don't think anybody's going to heaven. They are waiting for the glory of heaven to descend again and take up its place of residence where God walks with humanity. They have a very earthy picture, and it's a little screwed up. Because part of their picture is you live with it for 400 years and you become, once again, the downtrodden under a Roman rule. And you're like, wow, I keep reading those scriptures. And we become like these elevated people. And God's going to bless all the people of the world through us. And that will be really fun when we're at the top of the totem pole. To the point where even after his resurrection, the disciples are going, okay, this has all been really interesting, but when's the kingdom coming? Because I'm still not seeing like anything really cool that looks like we're going to be on the top of the totem pole. And Jesus says, well, yes, you have, actually. Because in the kingdom, when humanity gets its life back, humanity looks like the image of God. And it's men and women together whose lives are fundamentally always for the other. Always for the other, without the fear of losing your life because you can't believe that somebody else is living their life for you. Our brokenness makes that a terrifying story, right? Can I trust somebody would live for me? I got to secure my own kingdom first. Got to figure out my own identity, personhood first. God says, you'll never know who you are unless you're in relation to the other, so you can find out who they are and who you're not, and who you are. Because you're for them and they're for you. And you get to die so that you get to raise the other one up. And they spend their full-time occupation raising you up, and your full-time occupation is raising them up. And all of a sudden you don't have to worry about it. Because that's what the Father and the Son and the Spirit and their love for one another look like when they're in creaturely form, as God is fundamentally for the other. So Jesus is the one who embodies, and he really does embody in the incarnation that whole narrative in which God has called this people for his name, my son, in Deuteronomy, in the kingly Psalms. And Jesus gets told in the middle of a river by God, "You are my son, in whom I am well pleased and who I love." And what's the first thing that happens? The Spirit, who is God, says, "Okay, let's go reckon. If you are going to take on the identity of Israel in order to become a new Israel, to open up this whole room full of new Israel, to get their human lives back for good, then you are going to have to go reckon with your own human calling. So let's go reckon." And in fasting and prayer, imagine when you're an anointed one who just got anointed, like somebody out of all the scriptures that you've read. I don't think the Father told him, "Oh, son, it's going to be so awesome. In 10 days, when you go to the Jordan, that's when I'm going to show up and land on you, and then we can write this part of the story, and it's going to be very cool." This is an event that happens to him. And he has to go reckon. And the way that that reckoning takes place, actually, is the language of temptation. And when he is finally tempted by the evil one, because his human life is actually like yours and mine, except for this remarkable thing, which is that he obeys the Father. He actually goes, "What are we doing? I'm going to wear your image today. We're going to go do God stuff. Father, what are you doing? I only do what the Father is doing. And I do it by the power of the Spirit, so what are we doing?" The Father says, "Well, you're going to go into the desert, and we're going to pray about this and talk this through and reckon." And then the evil one comes along and goes, "Really? Really? Really? Can you make bread out of stones? Can you jump off a cliff and be captured? Really?" He doesn't ask him that. He says, "Really? Are you the Son of God? You've read the Isaiah texts. This doesn't turn out so well for the servant. Really? That's you? Prove it. For your own sake, if nobody else's. Really, you're the Son of God. Well, I can bypass the suffering servant, and I can give all this to you without the suffering. So why should you have to suffer?" Really? There's a reenactment of Genesis 3 right in our face. And the Father waits with the rest of the created order to see whether he's going to pick up the mantle and say, "I take it, and I'm going to walk this reality." Now, we don't get that because we're busy going, "Well, he's the incarnate Son. Of course he always knows who he is." I'm going, "Really? When do you think he just woke up and was like, 'I'm God'? That's so awesome. Look at this skin. I love that. My divine brain can read everybody else's brain in the whole wide world, but look at my cool skin. Like, this is very cool. And I really need the skin because I got to walk around and do some miracles so people will take me seriously when I say some things, and I really need to tell them about God. And I need a body to die for their sins, and then I'm going to pop back up to the Father, and I'll probably dump it along the way because I won't need it anymore. And then all my beloved brothers and sisters in the 21st century are sitting at Spring Arbor will think that I dumped it at Cloud 37. I don't have a body anymore because they don't know what to do with their bodies. And they never took my human body seriously. And that's why Cherith Nordling can be their friend, because she didn't take her body seriously for a really long time either. She didn't know how to be a female human image bearer who is being restored by this image bearer. So because I made them, I'm going to show you a couple slides. I don't even know how to ever do a PowerPoint presentation according to the way I ever set it up, but really want to say I use them. So look at these texts, and then I want to read a little something, and then we're just going to talk. We're going to spend a lot of this time talking, and I'm going to actually tell you a couple really crazy stories because they will help you go, your craziness is my craziness. And my ability to stand up here and say these things is like, I can't wait to tell people this because it's so different than the Christian story that I was sent to O'Hare Airport to tell them with my youth group, with the 4 spiritual laws, which was just deadly. No wonder nobody wanted to become a Christian. Sorry, I'll back up on that one for just a minute, and then I'll come back and be even meaner. Okay. This is my son whom I love, and I'm well pleased. Everything about image and likeness has been reordered to Jesus, Son of God, and Mary. He is watching our conversation right now, listening, talking to the Father about it, interceding for us with the Spirit, and he has a human mouth. And he prays for you with a mouth. Can I say that again? Jesus prays for you and speaks about you in a triune conversation with a human mouth. Read Romans 8. In his being is God and creation united forever, which is why Paul can go, what could ever separate you from the love of God in Christ? His own person can't be split out and separated. He's not God and humanity crazy glued together. He's this person who has joined humanity into the very life of God without tangling it up and making it fake humanity. And he hasn't tainted his divinity so that the integrity of the divine and the human are in relation to one another because they love and are for one another. He's this mystery of these two as one person. And he goes, what, you could no more separate you from the love of Christ than you could try to separate me. Because I am the love of God. And my name is Jesus, Anointed One, Christ. It's not my last name. It's Anointed One. Holy Spirit filled. That's how I got to do the cool stuff I do that I'm asking you to turn around and do with me. Paul goes, nothing. Not the past, not the future, not the present, not demons, nothing in the created or nothing. Why? Because everything about image and likeness has been reordered to him. And creation has been hanging on by its fingertips, waiting for the promise from Ezekiel 36 when God speaks to the land and says, hold on, the image bearer is coming back. The children are going to return from their exile. And when they do, your hills will flourish again. And you'll have purpose and beauty and meaning again, not as an arboretum that they can't touch you and screw you up, but because you are made for each other. Humanity is made for creation, and created order is made for humanity. We are not made to be disembodied souls for a place called heaven. Heaven is the unbroken domain of creation, where God comes to join all that is his in communion with us as part of all that is his. And in that context, he says, hold on. And then he shows Ezekiel this picture of a valley of dry bones. And he says, let's do Genesis again. Speak to the bones and say, live. Breathe the breath. Genesis 2, God breathing down. Breathe and say, live. Breathe. And Paul says, we've been and waiting and waiting, and creation, no fault of its own, is holding on, waiting for what? For the glory of the children of God to be revealed. Because he has already showed us new creation, first edition. And when they get their lives back, everything finally gets to be what it was meant to be, including them, and they will only ever be human. Because what are they waiting for? Their salvation. And how does he call it in Romans 8? The redemption of their bodies. The redemption of their bodies. That's their glory, is to be spirit-filled, gloried, new human beings in this new race with a new Adam, who is the first from among the dead, the first of a new creation, who also happens to be the pre-existent Son, who has always been. Now look at this kind of language. Hebrews 2. You made, this is Hebrews, remember quoting the Psalm? He says, somewhere somebody said, and he quotes Psalm 8, you made human beings a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. In putting everything under them, God has left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to them, us. But we do see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, who, because of what he suffered, because he entered into our human condition, gets to be the firstborn, and he's the perfecter and author of our faith precisely because he took on our story and made our suffering his suffering and put a different last word on it. And then he says this radical thing, both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity. And the rest of Hebrews says, and he still does, happens to still be human, high priest, standing in for you, first in line of the new creation, going, hold on, I got your place, and every time the Father sees you, he sees me. So you're good to go. I represent you as a new human in the presence of the living God. And I turn around as high priest and minister God's blessing and love to you as a human to a human by the Spirit. 2 Corinthians 4, the light of the gospel displays the glory of Christ, who is the image, icon of God. For God, who said, let light shine out of the darkness, again, we're back to first creation narrative, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. First creation, new creation. First creation, Exodus, new creation. This is the capitulating story all the way through the narrative. Learn to tell the Christian story. Find your place in the narrative. Don't let this secular culture and crazy Christian subcultures that are Gnostic, like I had, tell you a different story. Learn your story, love the one who has end-storied you by becoming embodied with you. 2 Corinthians 3, we all who with unveiled faces, reflecting back the Moses story, contemplate the Lord's glory and we're being transformed into his image, his icon, with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is Spirit. So again, with this sort of picture of Ezekiel 37, the assumption is that we can't receive glory and we can't be children of glory. We can't be co-heirs with Christ unless we've received the Spirit who lets us cry Abba and brings us home and begins our resurrection life already and not yet. And Jesus promising that the same power with which he functioned as a human being who was the divine Son, who relinquished all privileges to his divine power, says Paul in Philippians 2. He did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but became like you and me, so that what he did the way you and I would have to do it, so that he could turn around and invite us to do the same thing. How many of you think he has some secret, magic, divine credit card? That he's just whipping it, playing out. When does he know what people are thinking? Because he's got a divine brain. It's funny, I think Paul calls that a word of knowledge. Does he heal people? Does he ask you to heal people? Mm-hmm. Does he cast out demons? Does he ask you to do the same thing? Mm-hmm. Did he do that with his disciples, 12 and then 72 in Luke 9 and 10? Like a little preview pre-Pentecost? Mm-hmm. Don't go tell them I'm coming. Go do this stuff. Go show the kingdom. Go cast out demons, heal the sick, proclaim the kingdom, do the stuff. And they come home and they go, oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. He's like, I know, but what's really cool is you just got your identity back. So be thrilled that your names are recorded as children who already are able to cry Abba, as children of new life. You are in the story now. So Paul's final word, I've just been living with this word, is he says, what you were predestined for was to become conformed to the image, the icon of the Son, who was going to be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And when he finishes in 1 Corinthians 15, it's all about the resurrection, you know. It's about getting your life back. When Jesus stands as the one to whom everything finally comes and is under his feet, he turns around and he gives it to the Father, and he doesn't gather all of us and go with the Father, well, thank you so much. Thank you. I was worthy of that because, you know, the Father exalted me to the right hand of. It says, actually, he turns around and stands with us and presents it all to the Father, because that's also what a king, a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve, to use the language of Lewis, would do, would be to priest and offer back to God everything that he had dominion over. That we are children born of the Spirit waiting for these bodies, that we are new creation, heirs of God and co-heirs, and that we are to practice resurrection now. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and tell you a little bit of how much I didn't understand this story. I wrote it up really nicely. But I think I got a little impressed with my own wording. So I'm going to leave it right there, and I'm just going to tell you. When I grew up in a household of 3 brothers. My mom had 2 brothers, my grandma had 3 brothers, my great-grandma had brothers. So all of the women in the Loftall family line, and I think at least in my dad was a brother and a sister. So for a lot of generations on both sides of my family, it was one girl, lots of guys. And my grandparents, my mom's parents, were missionaries, church, like they planted like 20-something churches in Alaska, and in the Ozarks during the Depression. They were just like in this stuff. And they watched God do these amazing things. And we came up through a Pentecostal tradition where it was really okay for women to do this stuff. At the same time, there was a way that it was like the right way to be human was male, because that's where power rested. And I don't think anyone in my family would have ever said that. But it's where authority in the church rested, ultimately. It was just sort of how it was. So that's way in the background. I have a family. We move a lot. My dad's a teacher. We moved often. And so as my family would move, my brothers and I would basically have to start all over again. And we were like this little cadre, because we're only like 20 months apart or 16 months apart. And it was Mark and I, because Mark was the oldest, and then me, and then the little boys. And the little boys are like 20 months younger than me. So now they're all like 6'5". So it's Mark and I and the little boys. And we figure out like how to be like these little teams and just figure out how like to re-navigate our new neighborhoods. And until I'm like 11 or 12, I can be one of the boys. And my brothers would be like really offended if some guy was like, she's a girl, she can't be on our team. I was like, are you kidding? She's Cherith. Actually, they call me sis. She's 6, she can play. She can do whatever. And at the same time, my mom is giving me these kinds of messages. as I'm starting to develop as a young girl, she's like, honey, you really can't be running around in your slip without anything on when there's like a house full of boys. And I still remember her saying that to me when I was 9. And you know what? I blush with shame because that's what happened to me when she said that. I was like, what? And I was like, what? It's like somebody doesn't just see me like one of them? And then my mother doesn't have to say another word in all of these narratives about the fact that to be a female is to be the lust-producing machine. At 9, holy crow. So I've got to figure out how to hide my body to be able to be one of the boys and be part of a world where I belong to them. Now, at the same time that this is happening, we had this conversation, and I wrote this up, and we'll write it up again in my book in a different form. We were out playing basketball in my backyard. My dad had put a basketball court back there. And I was taller than all my brothers. I remember that. It was just this weird spurt like in junior high where you get really tall fast from all the guys. And so we were playing basketball, and I could really like whip the hook shot and make baskets. We were playing horse. So I'm feeling really good about the fact that I could, like we were talking, and we start talking about heaven of all things. And we realize, actually, it finally comes out, none of us want to go. Because we're like, oh my God, like, what are we going to do? Like, if our souls go to heaven, how will we find each other? Like, we won't know what each other looks like. And how will we see God if he like lives in unapproachable light? And then my little brother's like, and oh my gosh, we're going to die of boredom because we're just going to be sitting on clouds and singing. And I was like, oh, that's right. Like when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, as no less days to sing God's praise than when we first began. That was like really bad news to my little brother. And I was like, oh, me too. That would just be like, oh, there's better be something else going on because we're going to just die. And then we start moving into the conversation going, you know, this is really what I'm going to miss. Like, I know that God cares about sin, and I know that he like wants to save the world, and he loves the world, and gave his son, but we're pretty sure he's just going to blow up the world at the end of everything. Probably because we'd sat under some apocalyptic sermons where at the end of everything, God blows up the world and souls go to heaven. So we're like, well, you must not really like it very much, but we really like it, and we feel guilty that we really like it. And our friends who aren't Christians, they seem to like it a lot more than we do. So I'm like, ew. So my non-Christian friends really love the world, and I'm embarrassed to say that I do. So I keep my mouth shut. And wouldn't it be creepy to go to a place where there's no whales and no basketball? And you know, who wants to go? I know I'm supposed to pray, Jesus, please come back. And then we're like, oh, have you been praying that? No, I haven't really been praying that. Like, my brothers are pretty honest. Like, I know we're supposed to pray that, but we don't pray that. And we're like, why? And then Craig's like, because I want to stay up late. And Mark's like, because I want to get married. I'm like, I want to drive. Like we had like 25 things. What were they? They were human experiences we wanted to have. And if I go to heaven, I'm not going to be a human anymore. So we didn't want to go. Because somewhere there is a wedge that had been driven between the immortality of the soul and the incarnation. And this took deep. The fact that I can tell you that story and remember our conversations, this was it. Now we're going to fast forward really fast. I get to college. I'm in college. I'm trying to still be one of the boys. It's not working quite as well by the time I'm in college because I actually have a body that keeps giving me away. But I keep kind of pretending not so much. And I meet this guy who I actually get engaged to, and we are going to get married. And we're a few weeks of the way from senior year ending. Now, this is getting really honest. And it's really hot. He and I have joined a bunch of students, and we clean office buildings at night. And this particular night, it's only he and I who are going off to this particular office building. And I'm wearing my cutoffs. It is brutally horrible Wheaton College hot. And he makes some comment to me in the car that to this day I can't remember because I blocked it. But it was something about, I really would love to jump your bones. Or you're really hot, or something. And it wasn't the temperature. And I freaked out at him. I was like, I can't believe that you just split me. I thought, I'm marrying you because I trust that you see me as a whole person, and you just saw me through a sexual lens. He's like, what? Like, I'm gonna try to say it again. I feel like you didn't see the real me, like it was just my body. He goes, but you are your body. No, I'm not my body, I'm me, and you, I thought I could trust, and this went on for like 20 minutes, and it was going nowhere. And we're driving to this place, and finally, and I am married to him after like 35 years still, we get to the office building, and I was like, you know, honey, my dad's doing our premarital counseling. We need to talk to my dad, because he'll help you figure out how come you can't understand what I'm trying to say. So bless his heart. I call up, Dad, in a nutshell, this is sort of what I think happened, and I can't seem to explain to Robert like why this hurts me so deeply. He says, could I just talk to him for a minute? Yes, here. So they talk for like 30 seconds, and then he hands me back the phone, and I'm like, good, they're gonna have a really long like heart-to-heart later. And he's like, Cherith. I go, yeah. He goes, I just have one question for you, honey. I said, yeah. He says, when did you become a Gnostic? It's not the response. I was like, a Gnostic? He's like, well, okay, because if I understood you correctly, you just seem to like make it sound like the real you was like your soul or something. So that Jesus like saved your soul. I was like, yeah? He says, well then, girl, you just need to get saved. He says, don't you get it that Jesus, right this second, with his embodied reality, is God's massive yes ringing out through the cosmos about your bodied life. There is no Cherith who isn't this female human being. So he says, good luck with that, or whatever the phrase is. Click. And I'm sure my father was like going, honey, I can't believe the conversation I just had with our daughter. Like, what? What? Because I could say all the right stuff, but I didn't get it. Because I didn't have a culture that knew how to help me be an image bearer as a female. And it wasn't until I was pregnant with my second child, and I'd had a son, imagine. That's what we know how to do in my family. And I remember one day praying because my mom had started to undergo a dramatic healing. God was just doing deep, deep stuff in her life. And she would call me up going, honey, I'm so sorry I screwed you up so much. I'd be like, I forgive you if you need me to say that to you, but I really don't get it yet. She'd be like, oh, wait till God just shows you. I'd be like, I really don't get it. She's like, well, I'm getting my life back, and I'm praying that he gives you your life back because so many things I said to you took it away. Whenever you were trying to really grow into your femaleness, I'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry you're like me. She says, I hear countless things I said to you, and I ask your forgiveness. So I start working on this stuff, and I'm in psych school by now. And then you have to go to therapy while you're in psych school. And I'm praying one day, and I hear the evil one say to me, you know this isn't going to be a girl because you are so screwed up, you could never be trusted with a girl. And I thought, shh, I'll be damned, literally, if the generational line can't go forward because of my screwed upness. So I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen, Lord, but I'm going to work. I'm going to let you start to work on this person. And I had a boy. And the first thing I heard on the operating table in my C-section was the enemy saying, see, you couldn't be trusted. Over then which I heard the Lord go, could we take that back? And it was great because none of that fell onto Jackson. I wasn't disappointed that he was a boy in any way. It was just this weird thing that went back in on me. Fast forward 7 years, God's healing, doing things, and the weirdest way he decides to heal, part of the healing process is I get asked to write a master's thesis on feminist theology, which I didn't really care to do and wasn't interested in at all because part of it was that you had to like be with women. And I'd be asked to do like women's retreats and I wouldn't do them. I'd be like, pink tablecloths. The church doesn't let women have robust conversations. So I don't want to do that. So I did do one, but I made them bring rocks, and we did 1 Peter and did living stones, and they made noise, and they were like, what? There were no pink tablecloths anywhere to be seen. But I remember moving into this space and having to listen to the pain of these women who also were trying to figure out whether they too had a place, whether their sexuality mattered, whether their embodied life mattered. The wrestlings with men over their sexuality and their embodied lives, and how this conversation was just doing this crazy crisscross and never meeting. And as I'm trying to learn this, this is what happens. I'm a few months in, I've been reading and reading and reading this book, and I have the first person come to me who is a professor, who is a friend of mine, who says, Cherith, how's that going? Reading that feminist theology. How's that going? Trying to figure out, like, why would this woman feel like she needs to talk about the triune God in female form? Because God isn't male or female. And besides, we're not going to be male or female in the new creation. And I'm kind of standing there like, okay, you're my New Testament friend. And I said, isn't there like a debate with the Sadducees and the Pharisees where they're trying to figure out, like, who the guy gets to finally, which brother is married to this woman? And doesn't Jesus finally go, look, you're asking like all the wrong questions, because actually you're assuming that you're going to die. But in the new creation, you're not going to die. So you're asking, like, who's going to carry the family line forward through this woman? Which brother gets her to have babies? And he goes, don't you get it? You're going to be like the angels. You're going to be immortal. You're not going to turn into angels. You're not going to become androgynous. You're not going to become an immortal soul. He says, children of the resurrection. And I'm saying that, says Jesus, because you Sadducees who set the debate up, you don't even believe in a bodily resurrection, and these Pharisees do, and the question is moot for both of you because you're thinking out of old creation lens instead of new humanity. So I'm like, isn't there? Don't you think? Male, female? And he's like, you know, I don't even know why I said that. That's like so silly. Of course, it's ridiculous because I don't know why I said that. I said, well, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. Because I said, when you think about heaven, because now we're just talking out of the stuff that's just popping out of our mouth. When you think about heaven, I said, do you see me there as a woman? No. I said, do you see you there? He says, yep. I said, do you see me there as a woman? He says, nope. I said, what do I look like? He goes, you look really androgynous to me. I go, really? I said, why do you think? He goes, so that I won't have to worry about keeping it in my pants in heaven. He goes, what do I got to do? Heaven's got to be the place where I don't have to worry about this anymore. I was like, thank you. Thank you for telling me the truth. And now let's both go back and go, what the hell was that? Because that was not heaven. Because I don't get to be there. 2 weeks later, I'm at church, and my pastor Cherith, how's it going with this feminist theology? And why do women feel like they need to image God in their own image? Because God isn't male or female, and He's only spirit, and besides, there's not going to be any men and women in there. There's just God. I'm like, oh my land. So I'm like, I think there's this Sadducee-Pharisee debate, maybe over the resurrection. Oh yeah, David, can I ask you a question? When you think of heaven, do you see yourself there? Do you see me there? He's like, yeah, I see us there, but we're really androgynous. Really kind of formless, white, glowing. I'm why do you think that? Why do you think that? Because you know better, but your imagination has already gone there. And he says, well, Cherith, you know my marriage. You know my bipolar wife. You know I'm manic depressive. You know the hell that is my marriage. He says, the idea that I'd actually have to see the face of my wife eternally would be hell to me. So to both of these men, I asked them, so really, your Christian imagination has not been exercised enough to think your way into new creation as children of the resurrection, that you see your final humanity already given to you, and that when we talk about being image bearers of the Spirit, we're actually called to start practicing resurrection in the present. We're supposed to start practicing renewed relationships that are sexually healthy and whole, embodied selves that are persons in relation. We're supposed to take seriously that Jesus was tempted in every way that we are, so that we have an advocate who's actually human, who cares about this conversation right here and is listening and going, please tell them I adore them in their bodies. Although for most of the women in this room, they probably don't. And for most of the men in this room, there's just so much shame. And a lot of the women. When I was at Calvin College, they did a sexual purity thing. These guys really wanted to get together and try to hold each other accountable around their off-the-charts porns addictions that exist in every Christian college. So I know what some of you are going to go do tonight, regardless of this conversation, and my heart is with you, because an addiction doesn't make any sense. It's an addiction. But it's a disembodied addiction that will play you around. And if it's not porn, it's your video game that looks like porn. And your masturbation that doesn't know what to do with your body, and 1,000 other things. You really want a Christian story that helps you figure out how to be loved in your body. Because this is where you're going to be. So these guys are like, Cherith, could you come and speak at our sexual purity thing? It's like, yeah, if we could talk about Jesus. And they roll their eyes. Oh, Jesus is always the answer. I was like, oh, no, really. You really want me to talk about Jesus? Because I said the subtitle of the talk is Jesus Has a Penis. At which point, these guys are like, whoop! And I was like, and the best word I just said to you is not the one that just made your eyes pop open. The best word I just said to you is the word has. Because he's not an androgyne either. He's a renewed man. Because unless he is, I will never get to be a renewed woman. And you won't get to be a renewed man. So imagine having Jesus be the one who goes, Cherith, I get it when there's sexual temptation. I was actually really loving people the way the Father does. And so women loved me. They would have done anything for me. And you know what? They were beautiful. So I understand the glory of how we're made. And my body responds accordingly. But I also know what it's like to not sin and use the other for my own gain in my embodied life. So my students at Calvin were like, well, what would that look like? We're like, well, here's a practice. I said, for those of you who just walked across the campus, And I said, and because you guys laughed louder than anybody else about Jesus' penis, we're going to pick on you. I said, if you guys walked across the campus right now and you're sitting in this room with an erection, that you're still fantasizing around a woman who doesn't even exist because you made that woman an object for your gratification, I said, you have made that choice for us as a community to disregard the honor and glory of your sister. And you brought that into our space, right when we're trying to get into the space of the incarnate one. So let it go. And when it happens next time, I said, when you see somebody beautiful and you get an erection, that's when inside, I don't know what they'll do to you on Calvin's campus if you do this out loud. So inside, at least you should go, hallelujah! Everything's working. I am well made. I am wonderfully put together. Woohoo! I said, and then the next second is the one I'm interested in. Because you're going to start to pray. And they're all like, prayer. I'm like, no, I'm serious. You need to get right into a conversation with your high priest who knows how to walk you through this, because he had to do this, because he's been tempted in every way you are, but without sin. And he's going to ask you to see her and say, Lord, I thank you. I really do thank you for how I'm made. And I pray that you will take off all the shame and all the crap that comes with my Christian subculture that doesn't know how to help me be at peace about that. And now I thank you for her, because I find her beautiful. And probably in our culture, she stopped thinking she was beautiful at 8 or 9, because that's what the statistics now say. So I bless her beauty, and I pray that she would see herself beautiful the way that I do and the way that you do. And I pray for her relationships today, because they're probably full of envy and competition and fear, because she'll never be beautiful enough, and she'll never be smart enough, and she'll never be something enough in a subculture of competition like Christian colleges. And I pray for her family, because I don't know if she comes from a really strong one or a broken one, but I pray for the fact that she's not with them and they're still part of her, that you will hold that union. I pray for her friendships and her relationships. I pray that you would give her peace about the things that are destroying her and making her anxious. I just pray your blessing upon her. I thank you for my sister. I said, you do that for 7 seconds, and all of a sudden your posture has changed from making her an object for your subjective gratification, and suddenly you have moved to a posture of standing with her for her honor and her glory. And then your eyes and your gaze shifts, and you start to look around and you start to see who's looking at her the way that you were tempted to. And you pray for her protection and her safety, and for God's continued work in our lives to give us a way of relating to one another that's beautiful and healthy and holy, and can talk about how crazy and weird and wonderful and scary it is to be sexual creatures in relationship to one another. Because tomorrow morning, you are going to get up as men and women in relationship to other men and women. That's all you're ever going to do. You do not get to love Jesus in your head, in your heart. He is not interested in that. There's no such thing. There's just you. And you are embodied image bearers who are going to be conformed to the image of the Son in your whole being. So wake up tomorrow morning and ask him to tell you who he sees, and to begin to embrace the gift back of what that looks like. If you've got people on your campus who are all over the map in terms of their sexuality, you need to have an embracing, challenging conversation of what that looks like. Because if we can't be people together in the Christian story who have a new Adam who will redeem and restore all of our humanity, there are a billion narratives that will take over and happily replace that person's identity in the meantime. And you will lose them from our fellowship. And they are one with us. They are us. I am them. Whatever our screwed up sexuality is, every single one of us just needs to raise our hand in the room. If it's about being tempted toward too much work, guess what? You've got Jesus standing there going, wow, the Spirit is just totally pouring out of me today, and people are getting healed. And I thank you, Father, because look at, oh my goodness, and all of a sudden, like the sun's starting to go down, and we've been moving across, and all of a sudden, we're finally to you. And you're like, I've been waiting all day. And Jesus is obeying the Spirit, who's like, you're tired now. And if you try to act like my children in the 21st century in their little Christian subculture in America, you'll try to overdo, and we'll never get to Jerusalem 3 years from now. You'll be dead 3 months from now. But if you obey me, you will have to say, I'm sorry. I got to go eat dinner with the boys. And I've got to go rest. That, you need an advocate to know how to pray for you, to say no, so that your yeses matter. You need somebody who understands grief. Thank God he understands grief. You need to understand somebody who bears the marks of his wounds and yours for all of you secret cutters in this room. And food disordered people, because we don't know what to do with our bodies. You need to know that the one who adores you, gets you, and loves you in the space of your broken humanity, because he's already held you. Could you stand up here, my show and tell? Always, in the brokenness, you're always here, held by the arms of your high priest before the Father, going, isn't he gorgeous? We're really not stressed about him. There's places, yeah, he's not quite conformed yet, so there's a not yet part that's happening, but just keep hanging with him. He's going to just love into that conformity. But we're not looking at that word like, you got to start doing a little more devotions, buddy. We are not, because you know what? We've already seen him finished. Because the Father never sees him apart from the Son, who high priests his place and yours and mine. What could separate us from the love of God in Christ as human beings when we have a human being who is doing this right now? I've had students at Calvin come to me and go, I'm not really into Jesus, but I'm really all about social justice. Like, well, you might want to reconsider that. Because 10 years from now, when they're still hungry, and the guy who runs your aid agency has run away with your wife or your money, the only person who will still be for the poor is a human being who is priesting and reigning and prophetically speaking God's last word over their life, and his name is Jesus of Nazareth. So you might want to ask him what he is doing and participate with him. And it will be costly. It will cost your life. It will take the power of the Spirit to participate in the fellowship of his suffering, because it took the power of the Spirit for him to participate in the fellowship of yours. This is not an exchange program that says, if you do a little suffering, you get a little glory. This is Jesus going, oh, I turned my face to Jerusalem and said, oh, and now the glory of Jesus, God is going to be revealed in a cross. So Cherith, ask me. Stop falling into the Christian American narrative that says, if I follow the will of God, everything will turn out perfectly. So when it's wrong, something must be wrong with my relationship with God, or where's God? Okay, has anybody read the New Testament? Which is full of, hold on, hang in there, because you know what? It's going to cost your life, and the minute you think it's not going to, you're going to get slammed up the side of the head. And the minute you think it's only about resuscitation, so he didn't really want to kill that off. He just wanted to teach me something. Wake up and smell the coffee, because he's going to kill it off little bits at a time till he can finally kill the whole thing off to give you your life back. But the more he can kill off now, the more fearlessly you start entering any domain that he is in. Whether it's about suffering or healing, whatever form glory takes, you are there. Like a Paul who gets stoned. And I don't know anybody who leaves a stoning unless they think the person's dead or dying. And there's this funny little sentence that just says, and then the disciples gathered around him and prayed, and then he got up and went back to the town. And then the next day they went on to Pisidian Antioch. And then after they were there preaching the kingdom, and Paul's like, you know what? I'll bet people heard about that stoning. He doesn't say this. He says, you know what I think we should do? We should go back to those places where we were. We should go encourage them. Now that's a mission strategy that's not going over very well in Kenya, right? Around January, we weren't sure anybody was going to get to go on their exchange program from our Christian colleges. But that would be fearless resurrection life that says, what could they do to me? Kill me? I'll be back. Whether it's now or it's the future, I'll be back. When Paul finally gets to go to Asia, wanting to go, I can't wait to go, and God's preventing me, I got to go to Macedonia. For 2 Corinthians 1, brothers and sisters, I don't want you to be uninformed about the hardships we endured in Asia. And we thought it was going to cost us our lives. We really thought this was the end, but you know what? It happened so that we would not rely on ourselves, but on the one who raises the dead. So bring it on. I'm ready to be human in whatever way God invites me to be a human image bearer. That is the time in which you have been invited to live. That eschatological in-between space filled with the Spirit, with your human high priest and king and Lord standing in going, I'm busy. Want to play? It'll cost your life, but there's nothing like it because you get it back. So don't think I'm up here twiddling my thumbs in some spiritual reality waiting for the parousia. The angel said, that same Jesus who you saw, he'll be back. That's a story I didn't know. So preach the resurrection and live the resurrection. And don't be surprised that it comes with a lot of death. But it'll free you to finally get to be human in relationship to one another.